Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Building Smart webinar. This webinar is part of the Building Smart Virtual Summit for Spring 2022. Thank you for joining. My name is Jeffrey Olette, and I'll be your moderator today. So today, for the first of the technical room sessions, we're going to have a couple project updates. The first one will be on the openCDE for Documents API. And then the second one will be for the information delivery specification standard that is currently being worked on. So this webinar is scheduled to last about an hour. There'll be a short Q&A at the end, see how everything goes. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available in the replay section of the event, usually about 24 hours or so. Before I do hand it over to the speakers, I would like to remind everyone that your lines will be muted for the duration of this webinar. If you do have any questions or wish to make any comments, there is a chat box over to the right-hand side in the control panel. And go ahead and type in your comments or your questions there. I would also like to bring to your attention that Building Smart is committed to ensuring that participation in the development of standards is unrestricted and the process for their adoption is transparent. The standards that are developed do not favor any particular provider, are open, non-binding, accessible to all. Please take note of our antitrust code of conduct. So with that, I am going to set the speakers up here, our first set of speakers, and let me do this. I'm going to do this and this.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. So now we're live. Welcome to this first session today. My name is Georg, and Pasi from Solibri, Yoram from Econex, and me will give you a bit of an update about the openCDE Documents API project. Let's dive right into, because time is actually not so much for us. We just got half an hour. First of all, in these next 30 minutes, we want to give you a quick introduction who we are, then about the project, the openCDE Documents API, also with a small live demo. We'll also dive a bit into the technical parts. And then if there are any questions or anything, we'd like to have a quick open discussion, or more like a Q&A with everyone. First point, who we are. We're the BCF and openCDE group. I think by now, a lot of you have probably already heard about us. The group is consisting mostly of software vendors, so it's a very technical focused group. We're also, of course, free, anyone can join us. So we're always happy to get new people in the group. And if you want, you can just write an email to openCDE@buildingsmart.org, and then we'll give you access and put you on the email list. Now, for an overview of the open APIs for Building Smart. You see at the bottom, there is this foundation API, which kind of is a technical foundation for other APIs. There's, of course, also BCF, which is both an API and there's also a data format. But today, we want to focus on the Documents API, which is one of the next steps. We'll see in a few slides what it is doing. But the other APIs will probably get to an update there later. Speaking of the Documents API project from roadmap, or generally from the API's perspective, we have about 1 year for this Documents API. So we started last year in summer, and we are on track to be finished in around April of this year. So in really not next week, but in like 3 or 4 weeks or so. The status is, we're at about 80% complete. So we have, a technical implementation is done, a specification is done, and we are already very deep into pilot testing and user verification phase. There might be some other APIs that we'll work on as next steps, but still a bit in the planning phase. Now to the core of today's presentation, the openCDE Documents API. Very simply said, it's an open standard that allows you to exchange files or documents between clients, like a client application, a desktop application, for example, and CDEs, like common data environments. It's from a technical style very similar to the VCF REST API. I mean, it was developed by mostly the same group, so that's to be expected. And just as the VCF REST API, it's also built on foundations. This means from a implementer's point of view, if a programmer wants to implement or work with the openCDE Documents API, there is a lot of parts that can be reused from, for example, the VCF REST API. We developed this Documents API in a specific project where we're compromised of a group of around 10 companies. So quite balanced, a few servers, few client vendors, and all working together. The goal of this group was to provide a very early version 1.0 of the standard. So we wanted to have something that is both usable and also not too ambitious, so that it's easy to implement. So far, we're quite confident that we did this. And that's why we're now in the pilot testing phase. So we do have already implementations, and we're now trying and testing them. At the end, what you'll also see a bit of this, there will be a user feedback and hopefully also approval from our pilot testers. Now, for this part, I would like to hand over to Pasi. Pasi, you can show us a bit of a live demo.
First, there is this button in Solibri where I can select the server from which I would like to get the documents. When I press this OK, I get a browser window open. So, and now I need to switch the browser. So this brings up this Aconex UI. I take here a couple of models. These are not very big models. Actually, this one is really small. So now when I press the download button, things start happening in Solibri. So before I press it, I will go back to Solibri. And now I press this download button, and then now the importing starts in Solibri. So we have these two models, a ventilation model, and then there is also this metadata. This is like key value pairs coming from the CDE, and this is something that hasn't been standardized, like that every CDE would have these things, because of course these can vary between CDEs and even between projects. So this is just some set of metadata that comes from Aconex in this point. And now it's also possible to get updates. If I select here that I want to get a prompt when there is a new version, and now I will go to my fabulous cat tool called Notepad++, where I have this IRC file. So I will just replace here a string. And then I will save this file, and then I will update that to Aconex. So here in the documents, I hope I'm doing the right thing now. Yoram may help me if I make a mistake. So this is the one, and there is this upload new version, and then I'll just what was the file name? I hope this is this one. All right. Then I press supersede, and all right. So what was confusing was that this was this the same? Oh, this was actually I put the wrong file. I think this was a IFC zip. Do I have more than one? Which one?
You can look in the metadata in Solibri to see which one.
Yeah,
The
okay.
document number. I think you had document number. The field was document number, so if you look at that.
Sorry.
So document number is cont 00008. So
all right. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So that's why. Okay. That was wrong. That's why it didn't work. So I'll upload that. Update that one. Metadata is useful.
It is.
All right, now we got the button here, updates available, and this wall is now updated. So there is this, I changed this string in my cat tool called Notepad++. So I think that was the demo with some planned hiccups.
Thank you very much, Pasi. Thank you. I think to quickly summarize what we saw is, or what is probably the new thing about this API is that in contrast to earlier, where you had the webflow would have been a completely manual one, where you would have to download a file, then import it in your local client in Solibri, later maybe update it and so on. So it was quite a manual process. And this is now much easier with the API, because once there's an update, you get notified in your client. You press a button, and I think you could even show it to set it to automatic updates. And yeah, now I'll share my screen again. Let's continue. Sorry, didn't where we left off. So that's what we saw in the live demo. We also talked about the PCF API that is similar, but we also have found a way to integrate or make integration with the PCF API easier, because what you've just seen is that the Documents API handles files, which are very often also IFC models, for example. And of course, with the PCF API, you are referencing IFC models. Issues are typically associated with one or many models. So to facilitate this, there is already a mechanism in the PCF API. That's probably not the most used endpoint there is, but there are basically file associations for every PCF topic. Highlighted below, you see that in a typical API response, you could get these files with reference properties. A reference itself can, or is usually some absolute URL. It can also be an ID to an internal PCF project-specific file, which is used. But there's now a new way. with the openCDE Documents API, we have added the feature that you can basically reference or use a custom protocol. So, instead of HTTPS or something like that, you'll use the openCDE Documents protocol, and that indicates to a client who's compatible to it that this file can be accessed via the openCDE Documents API. So makes it again a bit more easier, because then you can also track with this new API like versions and things like that. So makes just the integration of PCF and Documents API, this bit more easy. I'd like to continue with a bit of a more detailed look at what we did in the project. We have, as I said, started in the middle of last year in June 2021, started with the specification implementation phase. That was or has been done by December last year. We are since then in the phase where we are deploying live projects, and where we are, I don't have the actual final count, but I think it's quite a lot actually. So lots of users are trying it out right now. And yeah, so we're in the user validation pilot testing.
I'd say 50 to 20. I think that's a safe bet. So I think definitely more than 10. I think 15 to 20 projects.
Yeah, that's a really good number. Thank you. Yeah. Didn't have it ready. And yeah, after that's done, so from the feedback we got so far, and from the let's say felt technical readiness of the API, we're quite confident that we'll say it's final, and then we will hand over this API to the buildingSMART process for finalization, which will again take a bit of time, but somewhere around the middle of the year we expect to have, let's say, an officially released version 1.0 of this API. Yeah, and since we already talked about these CDE, these pilot testing phases, we also started collecting some testimonials. We got, for example, one from Downarts. Basically, he said or told us that it's very easy for him to integrate this new API in their workflow, because they can just link this data so much better together than they could before. We got similar feedback from Milan Seguers from Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. They essentially described as well that now the integration is just much more seamless. And this also goes in sync with what the survey, very early survey we did after the users had a bit of time to test it out. So, for example, we asked them what their first impressions were with the openCDE Documents API, and generally, kind of repeating myself here, but I say it's important. It's very good because it's more tightly integrated, and just therefore, smoothens up the process a lot. We also asked them if the new API, the openCDE Documents API, does improve the current processes and how it does it. And they said, again, the same, that the data transfer is much more easy, and our coordination is easier, because there's basically less coordination required, since when there's a new model, you get the new model, and that's it, basically. So we also wanted to hear what do they think are the key benefits or disadvantages. I mean, we mostly wanted to hear the benefits, of course, but essentially it serves an important role in making the feature of having a single source of truth possible. So yeah, that's why we're quite happy with the feedback so far. We also asked them to rate the API in its current state. So we asked for ratings for usability, which was pretty much on 0.4 out of 5 stars so far. We think we can do a bit better there, but we also think this might still be a bit, because we tested with very early beta versions, especially of the software. Performance was we also didn't expect any problems there. And functionalities are probably could still be improved, but which, more than 4 out of 5 stars, probably there also aren't so bad. And now that you've heard what the users who tried out already think about it, they were very enthusiastic. If you want to get to feel the same, if you want to get a last-minute call to try it out for a few more weeks, and we would be very happy if we find more users, then please also get in touch with us. Send us an email to openCDE@buildingSMART.org. Search for one of us on LinkedIn somewhere. So just get in touch with us, and yeah, we can probably give you access. Now, for the last part, we wanted to give you a bit of an overview how we're working, because now we told you what we did and so on, and a bit of the technical details. But we thought it might also, since this is now a meeting of the technical room, it might also be quite interesting to see how or which kind of processes we employed. So it's probably not super rigid, because it's still a group consisting of or spanning multiple vendors, but we did mostly coordinate with GitHub. So we had, of course, our calls. We had we're using Slack and everything, but most of the productive work, most of the technical work was done in a private GitHub repository. So that's where we initially, where we collected all the minutes from the meetings, where we had some project overview. We used some GitHub issues. Basically, there are a few stale ones. That's why there are still so many open. But that's what we initially did. And then once we felt that we are at a point where we can release the API, where it's mostly stable, maybe with some minor changes, we transferred this status of the API over to the buildingSMART documents API repository, where it is now in a still work in progress, but there's like quite a lot of documentation there already. So you can, if you want, even go into very much detail. So you see like all the technical details. There's links to Swagger documentation. Swagger is basically a standard for specifying APIs and things like that. So sure, Yoram, Pasi, what did you think of the process? Should we add something? I think it worked for you as well, did it? So
yeah, I think it worked really well, and I think we've had very intense program. I think also from the implementation standpoint, I think at least for my team, it felt really intense as the discussions progressed to change the API. But I feel overall like the process worked really well. We collaborated really well, and it was a good outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. It has been nice working with this team of talented people from different companies and have a common goal. So there hasn't been any like problems with somebody trying to push some not so good ideas.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, from my point of view, it also was a lot of fun. I mean, so this we're not completely finished yet, but soon. And Jeffrey, I saw you already made yourself visible again, because we are at the end. We would be able for or would be available for a few more minutes if there are some questions, some anything really. I haven't really monitored the chat, so
there is one question from Edgar Westerhoven. How does this demo, for me, does this demos the CD? For me, this is a model comparison. Oh.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that. I mean, I guess this is relating to the live demo. There we saw, of course, the model comparison, because with the CDE API, what we did is we connected Solibri directly to Econex. Not, via a file download and then import or so, but directly there was a connection between Solibri and Econex. And then once the model on Econex on the CDE was updated, there was an automatic, I think it was like a polling or a discovery mechanism, so that the client could see there's a new version automatically downloaded. Just at the, I think, I'm not sure if you pressed the button, but that is kind of what we wanted to show. So very simply said, the Documents API does not provide anything that was impossible before, but it allows much tighter integration of just multiple software packages, clients, servers, and so on. And I think that's the real benefit, because it's just what the testimonial said. It makes the collaboration, the integration much more straightforward and easier to use.
So hopefully, yeah. So hopefully, Edgar, that also answers your second question, and that's the point. Is it is a common protocol to connect tools to each other so that you can exchange this information. And I think the interesting thing too is it's not just about IFC models, right? It's a document is any asset, any document that can be shared and used.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So, like now we have like few implementations on the servers, few servers that have been part of this project. But here we have Edgar has listed Aconex ACC project-wise. Just push those. I mean, Aconex is there already, but I don't know what is ACC.
Maybe it's ACA without the A. So I think ACA is there already.
ACA.
If it's ACA,
Yeah.
Project-wise, not yet, but they're definitely invited.
So then.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of these projects, it's having outreach from end users to their vendors and saying, hey, you guys should really get involved with this. We try our best from the buildingSMART side to recruit and get people on. We also have to recognize that there's a lot of things going on at buildingSMART right now that a lot of the vendors are involved in, and some of them have limited resources, so they can only tackle one thing at a time. But I think the great thing about this project and the progress that they've made in a relatively short period of time, I think a reasonable period of time, is that now you're setting up those vendors for success, because they have something they can implement and relatively quickly. So we'll see how that goes. I think there's another question here about the list of software companies that implement BCF API. So on the buildingSMART technical website, we have a list like that. And I don't know if I can provide the link here. If I go to that quickly.
And just to be clear, this is not BCF API. This
right.
is this API that we have been talking. So
yeah.
Yeah. And
eventually I'd like to add that to the software implementation database as well, is that the more standards and technical standards that we have developed, and the more tools that then integrate those standards, we want to list those on our implementations database and make sure that users are aware of what can be found where. So I provided a link there in the chat to that active software implementations database.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to
you.
turn it now over to Robin and Sara, and let me bring them up here. All right. And Robin, do you have your presentation ready to go?
Yep. Okay, so I'm Robin Drogemuller, and Sara Omrani is here with me. We both work at Queensland University of Technology, and we're jointly leading the IDS Stage 2 project. There's Sara. Okay, you've already been exposed to some of this if you watched some of the presentations from the opening day. The bringing open BIM workflows to life. There was a presentation from Michelangelo from ACA, where he was describing their software system, and part of his presentation was referencing their IDS, where here is some IDS XML with one of the queries they were using, and here's the results of one of the queries that he demonstrated in the system. And then Calvin Cam, in his presentation, also had a brief touch on the stuff they were doing with IDS and using that within their IDS checker as well. But they were fairly high-level views, and we'll give a slightly more detailed presentation in a minute. Anyway, the initial goals of the IDS project were to enable a specification requirements for properties, materials and classifications within the BIM files. We're working towards enabling links to URIs. The IDS material had to be computer interpretable so that it could then be automatically brought into authoring tools, and also to enable automatic validation of IOC. And the goal was to use industry standard technologies and generic parsers, and we're using regular expressions now, and it also had to be extendable. This was all defined right at the start of the project before either Sara or I were involved. Now the IDS process, and this is described up on the buildingSMART website. So the client has a requirement for some information in files, so they can then define their IDS using templates or a user interface system. They define this. Once it's defined, they send that to the modeler who's going to create the model with the data. So the modeler first off ensures that their software can provide the information that's necessary, and then they create the data. And then before they send it back, they can validate the data against the IDS specification. And the longer term goal was also to link IDS with the VSDD for data enrichment. So once that process is done, they can then export this, and then that's sent across to the client. The client can then validate the data to ensure that they're getting what they're expecting. And ideally, at the end of this process, we end up with a happy client who has all the information that they need for this process. So that was defined early on. There was lots of questions we received about where does IDS fit, where does it fit with MDB, MBD, UCB, BSDD, and BCF, and so on. Leon von Berlo has put together a video from the summit last year where there's a link there, and the IDS stuff is comes in about 12 minutes there. So there's a chance for you to actually see what Leon's plans were for this and how it fits with everything else. So we won't go into that anymore. So history, stage one was started in 2020. It was led by Cyril, and basically this was bringing together a lot of stakeholders and working with them on how to define some use cases that could be used to test this idea. So the idea of stage one was to bring these use cases together and prove the applicability of the IDS concept. And there were multiple meetings held, international discussions for over a year to define these use cases. Neither Sara nor I are actually involved in that process. We came in at the very end when that was all finished, and we're using a lot of the material that they've developed in order to continue the IDS work. So the sort of thing they were doing is looking at all the case studies, what facilities were needed in those case studies, and then using that to put together sets of priorities for the development of IDS. So they were looking at number one, popularity, but also ease of implementation, and also how you went with building blocks, where a particular facility was then, if that was in place, it would then support the development of more complex facilities. So it was the process they were following in stage one. So stage two started in late last year, late 2021, and the goals here are to implement and test use cases, and we're already doing some of that, as you've seen in the previous slides from the opening day, and then working through the implementation issues. So the goal is for us, for the implementers to actually be taking the test cases, running with them, finding problems, and then we update the IDS specification, XSD specification, and then test these ideas again, and having an iterative loop of implementation. And the initial goals were to define the units and the data types to underlie this. We've made the decision to stick with the metric units as the base units. So for each type of measure. We define which unit we'll use. So for length, the unit is metre, for example, and then it's up to the user interface to map between the units and in the files versus the units as the user may want to perceive them in a particular use case. We're also ensuring that the IDS material definitions has all of the richness of VIC material and vice versa. Looking at how to map assembly, so how do we build structures of components at a higher level, and currently we're working on each component can only be in one assembly, so and that's in the certification part of the definition. And if you actually want to have one component in multiple assemblies, then you define those multiple assemblies in the current implementation. And then we're also working to create more examples. And what we're trying to do here is follow this saying attributed to Einstein, that everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. So when we're discussing issues, when we aren't we're concentrating on the core issue. If there are corner cases that we cannot think of a real-world scenario where those corner cases would apply, and we just concentrate on the real-world scenario, and then we'll come back and sort out some of the corner cases if they start interfering or being a problem with real use examples. Okay, and the motivation for us at least, building fires, people get concerned about these. Grenfell Tower a few years ago killed 71 people. So what information is necessary in order to check this? Interestingly, 3 years before that, we actually had a fire down in Melbourne in Australia where the same material on a facade caught alight. So it wasn't as though there weren't some precedents for the Grenfell Tower disaster. And if you consider that when all of this happened, there was a big hoo-ha about how do we find all of these flammable panels. If we had BIM models and we had IDS, and we could build simple queries that would actually go through and identify those in the buildings where we have the BIM models. Now, the weirdness in Australia here is we don't actually have a single number for fire rating. We actually have what are called fire resistance levels, which consist of 3 numbers. The first number is how long the structural element will actually support its load in the fire. The second number is how long is it before the component cracks and allows flames or hot gases to go through. And then the third number is the insulation, how long it takes for heat to flow through the element so that a flammable curtain or fabric on the other side of the wall might catch alight. So this is a requirement if we're going to be using building code checking here in Australia. As far as I'm aware, this isn't used anywhere else in the world, so we need to have this extensibility to suit the Australian conditions. And how that would be used is a ground floor in a car parking centre where the spaces for the fire compartments are all shown in the hatched pattern. So in the normal sequence of development, you would define the groups of spaces that are your fire compartments, and in the building code there are limits on the area of those. So you define the groups of spaces first, so we could then check that that's defined. Then the second stage then is to put the fire-rated partitions, the barriers around the fire compartments, and they have to have the appropriate fire resistance level to meet the specification for the fire compartments. So in the scenario, if fire compartments, you don't want to search all the walls in a model to identify which are the fire compartments. So there's a simple flag on those. starting with compartments as groups of spaces. So if you put a flag on that to say this group of spaces is a 5 compartment, that can be your first level of checking. Then when you've got the 5 boundaries defined, and then on normally walls or floors, for example, if there's a flag on those to say yes, I'm a 5 boundary, and that could be when you're making initial decision configurations, and then at a more advanced level, you're actually attaching the fire resistance levels to those objects. And this is all within the current scope of IDS. Where so we've limited that so the queries have to be within the scope of one object. This is a simple schematic just showing the maximum distances to boundary for residential buildings here in Australia. This doesn't work, won't work in the current implementations of IDS because the site and the building itself are actually separate objects. And in the current scenarios, you would need to use rule checking software such as Libre to implement this sort of checking. Okay, now we've got a movie that we're going to show. This was put together by the vendors at BIM, and Peter Komplishek is doing the demonstration on this. So I need to stop sharing, and the video should be down here. And if I hit play.
Hi everyone, my name is Peter, and I want to show you our first implementation of buildingSMART's IDS specification in our BIM software. BIM is a common data environment that is focused on enhancing IFC information according to EN ISO 19650 requirements. But let's step directly into IDS. I select our IDS module, and I select an IDS specification, and you see that in our specification we have some requirements defined that are applicable on this model. The model is, as you see, a production site, so this is like a part again of a huge model, but we will focus on that. First, we feel that we want to check if a base requirement is met, and going from this base requirement we step further and check the data in more detail if the requirements are met. The requirements are according to a national Austrian standard. It's called B1800. It defines spaces and defines their classification. So the first step will be to go into the model and select all elements to whom the requirement is applicable to. So we went with the base requirement, which is IFC space. So we want all IFC spaces for our quality check. And we see we have in the model 61 IFC spaces, and all of them have a property set called Sonstige and a property called Flächenart Ö-Norm B1800. So the Flächenart Ö-Norm B1800 is the classification according to B1800. And again, we check here that 61 elements meet these requirements. And further, next step is that we check if those elements who have a property have a value from an enumeration. And we see, okay, we have an enumeration in 61 elements. That means all of our previously selected elements meet the requirements in terms of enumeration. And now we can go in more detail and say, I want to have the spaces that are reduced to production area, storage area, and sanitary area. We see we have 30 rooms that match the criteria. We can now select those, maybe isolate them, and say, okay, those are production. Okay, interesting. We can go further, and now we go back to those who do not match, select the other ones, and pin them, and say, that's interesting too. And so we go with the next ones and say we want to have all of type office. And we find 2 rooms of type office. So we can isolate them and see, okay, that's interesting. So this is an office. We can now see the data of the office. So this is already reduced to general information, and we have the office, and it's in German, it's Austrian standard and German standard. So we have office. So this is quite valid. And let's check the other one, and we see that it's both for office. Now we can go and see all information that is kept in the room. So that's more than before. And we say, okay, that's 284 square meters, which is quite a lot. So I don't think that this has to be an office. This will be production. So we go down to our requirements and we change that. I say, okay, H&F office will be a production area from now on. And in the German classification, we say it's also a production area. So the interesting thing is that we feel in this software is that we use the classification. The classification is not a real classification in terms of IFC classification reference. It's a property-based classification, and we can find those elements that match or do not match a criteria, and we can use the correct values for the enumeration as an enumeration in our software, and so we can edit those information elements according to an enumeration. And if we go further on, we have different space types that we can check and find if there is matching. And we find matching, there are 16 that are technique and production. Now let's see technique and production. And now we see that the one that we changed from office to production is still highlighted, so it's selected, so we did the changes. And at the end, we can go down to our BIM and IDS reporting system. And you can see here that we have an IDS report and we have a lot of specifications. Some are required, some are not required. And you can see that we ran through the first 5 and we had a lot of matches, a lot of not matches. Although the matches or not matches in this context are not the most important things. And so this is what we can do. Further on, we see for those who match, that's not so interesting. We show the not matching, and we see here all the rooms that are not matching. Then we have the other IFC GUIDs. So we have a list of GUIDs for each of the requirements for the non-matching elements. We can print this out, or we can export as an Excel file. So basically, this is what we do. And we can also use that for infrastructure, because we have here, for example, a simple infrastructure project, which is a part. As you see, this is a huge model, and we have like this model separated or split into smaller models. And here we can again select an IDS, but maybe it's clever to have a different one because we don't have any rooms here. And we have here again 4 different information requirements. One is prefab, one is in situ supports, deep foundation or temporary building elements, infrastructure. And if we go on prefab, we see we have 4 matching. We select them, and now we go there and give them color information. We proceed to the in situ support, and as a difference to what we saw before in our applicability, we combined the IFC entity with a property requirement. So we select all elements of type and property. And again, we have a result. We have 4 matching elements. We select them, we color them, and go further on. We go to foundation, and this should give us 24. Okay, that's a lot. Elements as a match, and we again paint them blue now. And the last we have is the temporary building infrastructure. And we have just 2 matches. Oh, that's interesting. Let's select them and give them a color too. And now we can, like here, see all the elements that we selected. And we can now go and like create a report as an Excel file, as a PDF, or we can go into our PCF and create a new issue, and by this communicate the result from our IDS. But that's another story. I thank you for your...
Just before Peter finishes, thank yous. Sara and I both teach into our construction management degree, so we're interested in the use of this to support temporary works and also prefab and modern methods of construction. So it's good to see an example like this.
Joining us. If you need further information, just go here. That's our homepage. That's BIMANT, and maybe you'll find some interesting information. Thank you.
Okay, so with IDS, we're at version 0.5, 0.1. I think we're 0.2 now, but this is the class diagram for the previous point. So the applicability aspect of the IDS is where you do the search. These are the search criteria to pull out the list of objects that you want to operate on, and then the requirement component of the specification is where you select which objects are either in or out of the selection set. And then here are the various other attributes you can apply to both of those components in the IDS and individual IDS specification. We've still got current issues we're going through. All of this is on GitHub, but we go through these each. Currently been working each week. We have around 20 people, more each week working on this, but we're going to switch to 2 weekly meetings. And now, some of the next steps we need to support more implementations. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, software implementers are not all at the same stage or have the same resources available to implement features, and the same with the IDS. So some of the implementers are planning to implement some of these in the next couple of months. So we want to have the group doing preparatory work so that when they get to the implementations, we can provide plenty of support there. Regicola expressions are being used to do lots of searching. We'd actually like to see a little bit less dependence on that and have some predefined formats, say for dates and so on, to make it easier for non-technical people to build IDS search criteria. And we're resolving issues as incrementally as they emerge from testing and industry use and so on. And one of the things that is on our roadmap for the future is linking in BSD. So here's a couple of lines from a IC file that Leon van Berlo created with some Dutch description there, something about timber windows. So if we have links to BSD, we could replace that with GUID. So it's up to you to decide whether which one is more interpretable, the Dutch or the GUID. And once we finish version 2, there'll be version 3. We'll be extending these capabilities to meet new user requirements. And it was interesting to note some of the comments in the session where Michelangelo and Calvin did their demonstrations, asking what IDS was capable of. So there is some interest out there already, and we'll be recording those comments as well to feed into the next versions. Whether Sara and I are still involved then will depend on whether Leon's still willing to put up with us. Okay, so here's some more information on IDS. So the project page where that workflow was shown is at the top there. We're using a GitHub repository for the source code examples and so on. And we're also using a Slack site for communication. And we're recording all of the meetings on Zoom. So we've got all of the meetings in stage 2 recorded with links on the Slack site, so that if new people come on board, they can actually follow the discussions. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Sara. So it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. I'd like to thank you guys very much for joining us. Hold on a sec here. I'm not on stage. I can add you to the stage.
There you go. I didn't have any questions, but thank you, Jeff, for running the session today. Very nice work from everybody. I want to ask everybody to continue along with our sessions this week. In about an hour, we have TR2, which talks about just general work that we're going to be looking at on the future development of IFC that play hand in hand with all these other things you see in here today. And then we have sessions on Wednesday and a wrap up on Thursday. So appreciate the time. We're just over, but thanks everybody for joining today, and welcome to the Technical Room sessions at the buildingSMART Summit.
Thank you, everyone.